So this session is called AI What Next? And we've heard a bit of chat this morning and this afternoon about AI, but it's been in the background, as it were, of other discussions about economic growth, about fixing the state. But as somebody, I think Lily said earlier, as she was introducing her unconference session, we shouldn't be talking about anything but AI. AI is the big thing coming down the track. It's already with us, and it will transform the way we think about all these questions. So it's pointless talking about anything else without really understanding this. And we said that we would run this session a bit more like a workshop. So if you want to come forward as well, you're very welcome, because then we're a bit closer together and huddled together, because we want to make this interactive. We want people to give their thoughts. I think what we want to do in this session, I'll introduce Marc in a minute, is talk not necessarily about what our AI economic strategy should be, or what the government should do, but more broaden it out to a discussion about what kind of AI future will we have? What will the different scenarios, which of the different scenarios are we likely to end up with? And if it is as transformative as some people believe it will be, whether it's in 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, it is likely to change the world in which we live. And it's likely to change the values that we live by. Question mark. Will it change our values? Are our values in our modern, liberal, democratic society so durable that regardless of the impact that AI has in the labour market, regardless of whether it ends all human jobs, whether it transforms the way that we interact with each other, that our values will remain, or will our values change? So that's kind of one question we might want to discuss today. And then secondly, can we use our values to shape the AI systems that we will have going forward? To what extent are we actually in control of how AI will shape the world? And obviously, the UK, the US, the Anglo-American sphere, Europe, liberal democracies are not the only people investing in AI. Obviously, there are other non-democratic countries that are investing heavily in this. So the competition for who will dominate AI systems is also a big question. The person who will do most of the speaking, you'll be pleased to hear, is Marc Warner, CEO of Faculty AI, who's a Civic Future conference regular. He's spoken for us twice before. Faculty AI, for most of you, you will already know this, but it's a company that connects cutting-edge technology with real-world applications. And Marc has been on the Prime Minister's AI Council in the past, so he's advised Number 10 and government. He also, during the pandemic, helped the NHS save thousands of lives, and so has had very real experience of working with public services and seeing the application of this stuff. And has many other roles besides. But I'm going to ask Marc to set out, just to start with, so that we're all on the same page, what kind of AI future we should be looking at. And I just as a prelude to that, somebody earlier in one of the sessions voiced some skepticism that AI would be as transformative as people think. And I have to admit that I have been one of those skeptics. I've heard people talking about AI for a few years now, and sort of wondered, is it like the internet? Does it really transform our lives? Will it really be the end of jobs? Surely we'll be doing just new jobs. We've replaced human beings at supermarket tills. Nobody's really noticed that. But then in the last week, I've heard two people whose judgment I trust, including Marc, say, no, this is a really big deal. And people in Westminster and Whitehall have really not grasped it. And we're in denial about how big this could be. So I'd like to ask Marc to start out by setting out what that future scenario could look like. And then my role is to be the village idiot and to ask the stupid questions that you're all too embarrassed to ask. But please do also ask questions, and I think we'll get Slido up as well.
Ideally contribute, right?
And ideally, it's a workshop. Yeah. Exactly. And there, obviously there are people, as with all our sessions, there are people in the audience who are as knowledgeable, more knowledgeable, than the people on the stage. Marc, do you want to start?
Well, I guess the thing that strikes me about these discussions is that underlying it all is some assumptions about the human brain. So really, there are sort of two categories of assumption that people make. One is that the human brain is a totally unique object in the universe. And the other is that the human brain is a technology like any other. Now, what you tend to find is that economists actually smuggle in this assumption of the human brain being a totally unique object into their theories. And that downstream of that, then they get into this situation where because the human brain is unique, it can never be matched by other technologies. And so AI, therefore, sits in the category of things like, the motor car or the internet or electricity. There's the human brain up here, everything else down here. And so the kind of downstream of that, the analogy they have in their head is like AI is a tool. And so they spend their time thinking about, is it like a small increase in GDP? Is it 0.5%? Is it 3%? Blah, blah, blah. Okay, that is one perspective, and I think there are some sensible arguments for it. Another perspective is that the human brain is actually a technology like any other. Think of it like a particular type of computer chip. Works at 20 watts, it does, 100 billion operations a second, and that in principle should be compared to other technologies. And historically, that level of computational ability has been dramatically exceeded anything we've been able to manufacture. But over time, we're getting much, much closer to that. So if you think of the human brain as not a unique technology, just a technology like any other, then AI could in principle match it. And then the analogies that you're led to use is that when AI appears, it will feel more like a kind of alien species landing. I think you said, Natasha said, it's like a sort of 100 million super intelligent immigrants or whatever, because now AI and human brains sit on the same level. And so the analogies you're led to are kind of analogies where this new AI is kind of our type. It's not a different type. It's not a tool that we can use. It's of the same type as us. And of course, then the downstream consequences of that is like, let's say a super intelligent alien lands in Parliament Square and we can see that its capabilities vastly exceed ours. Your first question is not, is this like 0.5% on GDP or 1%? Right? Your first question in that world is sort of more geopolitical flavor. It's like, bloody hell, who's in charge of our society now? Am I safe? Is my family safe? And I think actually these, like, if you root back through a lot of the discussions that go on at the moment, really it's a discussion about, is the human brain this super unique object that can't be matched, or is it a technology like any other? Now, I will say that if you look back at the history of science, you can find time and again scientists making the mistake of assuming human specialness. We were the center of the universe. No, we're like on some random branch of some random galaxy, a completely kind of average part of the universe. We were put here by God. No, we evolved like animals. Quantum mechanics requires consciousness to collapse the wave function. No, any object of suitable mass will do. And so I don't think it should be a surprise to us to find, when we really dig into it, that actually inside our theories of economics, we've hidden this notion of extreme human specialness. And actually, if you unwind that, suddenly you start thinking of the brain as a technology like any other. Suddenly you start asking much more like reasonable questions about when you get to the level, like when you can find technologies that match it. And suddenly all of this starts looking like quite a lot more concerning. And I think, my perspective is closer to that second one. I do want to recognize that these are like not scientifically settled questions, but there are a few interesting pieces of evidence. So if you go back and say, who made the best predictions about AI and its capabilities over the last 20 or 30 years, Ray Kurzweil just looked at Moore's law, looked at the operation, estimated the operations of the human brain, kind of squinted at that and said, we'll probably have computers that are about as intelligent as humans in about 2029, I think he said. Shane Legg, the co-founder of DeepMind, in about 2005, and then publicly in his blog in 2011, squinted at the same numbers, and he said, its distribution, I think it'll be 2027 or something. I can't remember. You can look it up on his blog. Is still live. And so there is and then lots and lots of other people, if you look at almost anyone else, they just made absolutely terrible predictions that were just turned out in retrospect to be total nonsense. It's hundreds of years away. It's thousands of years away. And so, as Munira said, I was involved in some of the early COVID stuff, and really all we did there was stare at that exponential really hard and think, if this continues just on the trajectory it's on, what are the repercussions? And we stared at the NHS capacity, and those two things, it was like pretty clear that something bad was going to happen. So behind me is a plot of AI and its ability to solve increasingly difficult software development tasks. So basically this axis here is how long does it take a human to do the task? This axis here is obviously time that the model was released. And so what you can see is that this line is showing that in every 7 months, the length of time that the task that the AI, or the length of time of the task that the AI can complete with a 50% success rate is doubling. At the moment, we can complete tasks for about half an hour, somewhere between half an hour and an hour. In 7 months' time, we should expect that to be 2 hours, 7 months after that, 4 hours, 7 months after that, 6 hours, 8 hours. Maths, complicated now. I've 10 years out of physics, so my mental arithmetic has gone downhill. Now, these are very clean tasks with very high levels of data, and it's only a 50% success rate. So this is, in some sense, maybe not that interesting. We've spent the last few weeks thinking about, if you really stare at that exponential, think about its consequences for higher and higher levels of accuracy. When do they come? So rather than a 50% accuracy, when do you get to an 80% accuracy? Turns out probably about a year later. When do you get to a 9? Well, now I've got to get my numbers right here, but you should be able to read it off this graph, right? Ultimately, what we're showing is probably too small. I wasn't really intending to show these, but then I thought it'd be useful. These are years. This is 2020, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29. So these are low messiness tasks, as in well-defined tasks. If you go to high messiness tasks, you get out to 2031. Now, the gap between every one of those lines is hundreds of billions of capex invested in GPUs and like continuing progress in Moore's law and a bunch of things like this. But if you stare at the exponential trends of today and just take that very seriously, AI will be able to accomplish sort of with 99-ish% accuracy tasks of about 8, let's say, days by 2031, reasonably messy tasks as well. I don't know whether that's right or wrong. Like, I'm not trying to make the strong claim that all of the factors that underlie this graph are going to come true, because, America could go to war with China. That pushes these lines out, could push them out many, many years, even decades. But nevertheless, in as much as you kind of treat AI as a normal technology, or you treat the human brain as a technology like any other, which I think is actually the most scientifically valid version. And then you stare very hard at the best evidence we have and just kind of take the relatively simple Philip Tetlock, like, let's just extrapolate out the trends and see where they take us to. There are no jobs by like 2033 or something.
Can I just ask 2 questions to clarify? So you talk about the billions in capex,
hundreds of
billions in capex that would need to be spent. But my understanding is that the big driver in progress in this is the capex. It's as long as you've got increased, compute, that you can actually get to this point. So it's not determined by humans getting better at figuring it out.
There are algorithmic improvements as well. So there's certainly our algorithms are getting better. We can sort of train better models on the same level of compute. That's one trend that's happening. Compute is getting cheaper with Moore's law, particularly in these more special purpose chips where you need enormous parallelization. We kind of sort of in some sense underinvested that in them until the AI boom. More of our investment went into more conventional CPUs. And there's this enormous ramping capex spending on compute. So in actual fact, these models don't actually scale that well with compute. They basically, we would normally consider it a very inefficient scaling to make the algorithm better if you had to invest in these kind of like these amounts of compute scale up that we're having to do. But nevertheless, because the economic prize at the end is perceived to be so large, the world's largest companies are investing sort of Apollo program, Manhattan Project percentages of GDP into this, but just from the private sector.
I think in the last year alone, I can't remember if it's Microsoft or an equivalent, but had spent the equivalent of what the Apollo program had cost over the course of a decade. And that is just, that, as you say, the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow is pretty high. Yeah. And then the second question, just for clarity, is when you talk about the messy task, can you give us a real world example of what you mean by that?
Well, I mean, so all of this is actually from a paper. I'm just going to whip through to show you the actual. So this is like the way they. This is the way they define messiness. And so, it's sort of, let's pick one. Does the task involve interacting with a changing environment in ways that significant to the task's success, even if the agent makes no action? Right. So if the environment is changing more rapidly, that makes it a much harder problem for machine learning, which is learning from data. And so the way this paper sort of tries to articulate different levels of messiness is you give them a score on this using these criteria, and that gives you either a high messiness task or a low messiness task. So where the kind of goals are hard to specify, where the process is not like necessarily that consistent, where the landscape is changing regularly, those make a task more messy, and this makes it less messy. I should also say that these are all kind of like, this is talking about high data tasks, high volumes of data. We're trying to think through what lower volumes of data mean in these contexts and like what the equivalent would look like. But at least for sort of reasonably well-defined tasks, this is roughly the best evidence we have.
And then just one final question, and I want to open it up for thoughts. The interface with robotics is the other, because obviously when you say there are no more jobs, are you including manual labor, childcare, social care? Can we have robots that are programmed by AI that could, in theory, just replace all jobs? Or are you talking about a particular strata of jobs?
So in the economics literature, at least, or the economics databases that we've been looking at, they tend to divide tasks into social, intellectual, and physical. So this is really talking about intellectual tasks. But remember that designing robotics, which manufacturing robotics and whatever, is ultimately backs out to an intellectual task. So I think that certainly introduces a lag on all of these numbers. And by the way, this is even this is just saying when it is possible. It doesn't mean that it will get adopted on that time frame. It doesn't mean companies will actually do it. So this is kind of like the fastest it could possibly be in some sense. But so I think there is undoubtedly a lag of using this to design better robots. There's undoubtedly a lag every time you have to interact with the world of atoms and build physical infrastructure. So different, those physical tasks sit further downstream of these kinds of things. But there is, if you buy this idea that the brain is a technology like anything else, and this is, then all of that sits downstream of just these kinds of ideas.
Okay, hands shooting up already. Go ahead.
Mark, thank you so much. This is really great. I appreciate the visual aids. As you think about the visual aids behind you and you think about the decisions that you make with your company, in what ways are you making decisions that are effectively long AI progress and capability improvements, and in what ways are you short those trends?
So we help, I think there are different implications for these kind of ideas at the kind of state level and at the company level. For a company, here is a fraud process in a challenger bank, and just taking the tasks inside that process and laying them out on these time horizons so that you can actually start to see when things are automatable. I think then if you're actually trying to make decisions about this, you want to think about where's your competitive advantage, where should you be building, where should you just be buying, if you are going to try and adopt things rapidly, how do you kind of compound that advantage in some way into a more conventional moat so that when everyone else catches up, you have some brand or capital or whatever advantage, distribution advantage that sustains. So I think these ideas are kind of the start of a conversation. In some sense, our day job is helping companies think through what the consequences of this mean for their businesses. I think there's also a question, though, of what the consequences of this mean sort of for the West. Like, how much does this change the fundamental kind of ways that society operates, what makes societies successful, and therefore how does that, what elements of our society should we be trying to protect? Maybe an analogy is we're in the foothills of the Industrial Revolution, and we try and say, what should Western values be out the other side? That's an extremely difficult question, and Bismarck would have a very different sense of what Western values were than we would these days. And so I guess the questions that I'm really keen to get everyone in here's perspective on is this intersection of, if we take these graphs quite seriously, what does it mean for what we should be doing at bigger levels?
Come back quickly, because I know that there's some others.
Follow-up question. As you look at these graphs, are there decisions that you would take differently if the takeoff speeds were 5 times slower?
Definitely, yeah. I think let's take two simple ones, like hiring of junior people. These suggest slowing it down. If these were 5 times longer, that would it would basically be immaterial for that. At a country level, this points to trying to be quite aggressive in figuring out what a country's AI strategy looks like. Maybe much more larger movements of spending into energy, compute, AI, than you would if this was much longer. If these timelines are right, then AI is the only thing that matters. If these timelines are wrong, then it's much more conventional priorities.
Can I just, I know you've been waiting. Can I just ask, who buys the assertion, who agrees with the assertion that there will be an end to human jobs, if not in the next 5 years?
I wouldn't quite claim that, actually.
Okay,
so I think we already know.
You think there'll be an end to some human jobs, but not all?
Well, we already know a bunch of...
Do you think it will be all?
But that's just so I think there's every chance that we could screw this up and destroy everything. If we don't do that, though, we already know a bunch of jobs that exist in worlds where we're already dominated by superintelligence. So Magnus Carlsen knows exactly what it's like to have a job in a world of superintelligence.
Yeah.
That's fine. Premier League footballers, there's no sense in which we care about the fastest way to get a ball in a goal, or Usain Bolt running 100 meters. Or Hermes bags. There's lots of categories of jobs in the economy already that on economic efficiency is not the thing that is valued. And so there's no reason that those should change.
Okay. Yeah, go on.
No, great points. As someone who was working on GPT-2 when that first came out, I'm feeling the exponential curve. So I'm from the incubator for AI in government. There was a point you made earlier around the fact that if America and China are competing, that might actually push back the time horizon. I'm curious if your perspective, I'm seeing a lot of things in the US where AZ, their equivalent, has now been integrated into the DoD. China is increasingly bringing together researchers together. And it feels like more of an accelerationist vibe from the two great powers in this space at the moment. Do you think there's kind of that is truly going to be accelerationist, or is that?
All I meant was like there is lots of crazy events between sort of wherever we are here and up there that could happen, and war between the US and China is one that could throw, because you should think of the kind of those lines as the spacing between them as contingent on the types of investment that have been happening over the last 6 years continuing out. There's many reasons, like we could have an economic crisis, we could have wars, we could have regulatory burdens. Like there's many ways that could just fail. So again, I consider these to be the starting point, not by any means the end point of a prediction.
Thanks. Yeah, it's really interesting. I suppose my reflection is that, you know, if we just take the graphs pretty seriously, that in terms of the political and media discussions around AI, they are quite divorced from the seriousness that this implies, or even the level of vision that would be required to like have this as a general discussion with the public. Like, you know, when the Prime Minister launched the AI action plan, you know, it was a very kind of inside baseball thing, and there was no kind of big like breakthrough vision about it. And then still what's going on in terms of media discussion about this right now is like that all the papers were continually running pieces from Andrew Lloyd Webber about how, like, you know, like we can't possibly let the artist copyright get thrown under the AI bus. I guess my question is like, do you think we're lacking a big vision? Do we need someone to be putting forward a big vision for this, like a kind of like, you know, like Steve Jobs calling the Mac the bicycle for the mind type thing that isn't there at the moment? At the moment, this is just because, and if you speak to MPs about it, they'll tell you my constituents they either don't care about AI or they're scared of it. So it's like, it feels like somehow that this kind of discussion is happening within the industry, or just, you know, periphery outside of it on social media and stuff, but not in the wider culture. And like, how do we crack that? Who has to make that argument?
You might know better than me.
Well, I suppose the question is there a positive vision that overcomes the fears that people have that their way of life will be transformed? So is there as you talked about, you know, actually there are still going to be fulfilling ways of living your life. There are still jobs that people can do. You can be a handbag designer. You could be a brilliant sports person. Is that the positive vision that you sell to the public? Or do most people think, actually, those are fake jobs? That's not a real thing. I'm never going to be a handbag designer. I'm never going to be a tennis pro. Is there just a kind of fantasy that we will actually be able to get through this world and maintain this very core idea to our sense of society, which is that individuals work and that work is fulfilling and allows them to be self-sufficient and look after their family? Do we just have to accept that for most people that is not going to be the reality? I mean, there was a discussion that we had last week with, you mentioned Natasha, and he was talking about there are some countries that have benefited from having rich raw materials in their territory. So Saudi Arabia has had oil money for a very long time. Most Saudi Arabians do not work in kind of real jobs. They have a kind of fake job economy. They have a very large immigrant population that does construction and so on. But actually, people are broadly quite satisfied because there is growth.
Aristocracy back in the Victorian era.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So maybe we just have to get used to the idea that people are not working and earning their way in life, and that our sense of what's valuable comes from something else.
Well, I think rooms like this have a tendency to overestimate how much the rest of the world gets their meaning from their job. Like it's perfectly possible that, you know, you could think of it as we had to have an education system for like whatever it was, 18 odd years to just beat into us the idea that jobs were how you kind of got your identity, got your value, got your meaning. Because if you went back to hunter-gatherer tribes, they'd sort of look at you slightly crazily if you told them that working for another faceless person inside a thousands of person organization was in any way geared to what humans find meaning. Much more like friends and family and doing things together and hobbies. And so I do think there is a positive vision out the other side where, we've done things safely, people find meaning in things that are much more natural and much closer to human nature than the kind of slightly dehumanizing elements of the post-industrial societies. But I also, I guess, I've taken the view on all of this that I'm not clever enough to be able to know what the right answer is out the other side to be convinced or to kind of tell a noble lie. So we've actually made a documentary about, we got a bunch of people together, sort of Stan McChrystal and Mark Sedwell and Yuval Harari to play a war game of like what happens in the geopolitics of AI, and we filmed a documentary of it. And in that, there is no agenda of like this is going to go well or this is going to go badly. We try to put both perspectives forward because having watched all the COVID stuff, like I think there are a lot of weird repercussions of people trying to do the right thing, trying to get the population to do the right thing. Like, everything like vaccines would be, beneficial for groups that probably wasn't beneficial for whatever that might be. And then those have these weird spiraling effects. And so from my perspective, I think there are positives, there are negatives, and I'm not clever enough to say how we should frame it up. And I actually think often the people in general are like more right than they get credit for if they're told the truth.
Sebastian, and then I'll take a couple because we've only got a few minutes left. And Sebastian, and then the gentleman at the back with the sunglasses on his shirt. That's you. after Sebastian.
Yeah, so we've talked about the risks, and I think those are very real. Policy makers gravely underestimating how radical the economic transformation of AI is going to be. But isn't there equally a risk? I hear this a lot from people who develop and work with AI, that they almost think the solution to problems of AI will be more AI. So there's this idea that AI is not going to have all of these limitations we now see of AI are not going to exist because I think they share your assumption that human mind is a technology like any other. Now, I'm not going to get into the metaphysics of that, but I think one primary issue I see of it is that technologies are not like one another. So a musket and a laser may do the same thing, the same outcome, like, I can write an essay and AI can write an essay, but we're doing totally different things to get there. So that the human mind is nothing at all like an AI. In fact, there's not one thing it does that's directly comparable. It's the only thing is that what comes out of the other end looks the same, but the AI not only, and I'm saying this as an academic philosopher, it not only does not understand, it cannot. It doesn't have the capacity because it isn't a person. It doesn't have, the reason I know and understand things is because I have a body, because I can have a sense of ownership, because I'm a sort of thing that has evolved over time in order to survive and perpetuate itself. And AI hasn't been created like that, and it can't be like that. So I guess what I'm getting at is that the AI maybe do huge numbers of things that we can do, but there are going to be, and I'm not pretending to know what they all are, but there are going to be inherent limitations to what it's going to be able to do and what it can replace and what it can't replace. And I think one of my fears is that it's going to be able to automate an awful lot of things, but we're going to lose things in the process that we weren't expecting. So we're talking about, a lot of AI developers are talking about automating innovation, but an awful lot of innovation arises because people who are working in a practical way with their minds have ideas, but an AI isn't. Is an AI going to be doing that in the same way?
I think you're sort of articulating the AI, the human brain as a special object in the universe theory there. Like, if you make strong claims that AI can never do X, you're inherently kind of making this claim about the human brain and therefore putting it in this special category.
How do you respond to people who say, well, AI hasn't made a scientific discovery yet, so therefore it will never make a scientific discovery?
I mean, you can go back in the history of people making claims about what AI hasn't been able to do and find that time and again people say AI can't do X. And lo and behold, at least in the last 20 odd years, that just turns out to be wrong. I actually do think that question of why, if a human had read anywhere near the scientific literature that any of these LLMs has read and been able to digest it, it seems inconceivable that they wouldn't come up with a new discovery. And yet, it is true that I don't think people can point to stuff here and there that maybe is kind of new knowledge in some sense. So what I would say with these graphs is I think it's perfectly possible that LLMs top out at the level of human experts. This is nothing in here is claiming super intelligence, right? I also think that it's perfectly possible that they could expand beyond that. I mean, we're now getting to quite a lot of detail about how and why they work and whatever. But let's just say none of this in here requires fundamentally new knowledge generation. Basically, what this is saying is we can gather data from human experts. If we can gather sufficient data that we can train the model to perform like those human experts, then we can roughly match their performance. And even that level of ability dramatically changes society. And it's possible, and I think I can make reasonably strong arguments, that there are ways that you can get these things to race past that as well, in principle. But this is not relying on that assumption.
I was just wondering what you think this means for the stock market over the next 10 years, what that's going to look like, how our investing might change.
Can I just take one final question, then we've got a bit of time?
Thank you so much. I'm super interested in your out the other side question. I guess I struggle from a policy perspective because of the degree of uncertainty that this presents. I think people in the Stone Age or in the pre-industrial revolution would have struggled to articulate a good society on the other side of it. How do you begin to plan for that? What kind of mechanisms do you use? Thank you.
I'm absolutely no expert in financial system. I mean, in some sense, I know economists like to say that, one of the reasons they don't think things can go crazy is because the markets aren't pricing in very effectively. I'm less convinced that that's true. Like all of the American growth, roughly all of the growth of the American stock market relative to ours is in about 7 companies that are all extremely tech focused and, very sophisticated in AI. And you can see the expenditures that people like Zuckerberg are making to bring in the top AI researchers at extraordinary salaries. And so I think there is some sense in which the market is at least kind of somewhat pricing this in. Now, of course, a bunch of all of these tasks here, you could just take trading and divide it up into its tasks, lay them out across this thing, look at the relative accuracies, the costs, the speeds. That will play out inside the kind of operationalizing of the financial markets. But then what to invest in, the tech stack of the future, which drives all economic efficiency, will have to be raw materials, energy, compute, AI and data, robotics. And then if assuming we do everything safely, out the other side of that is sort of human health, human entertainment. And kind of that anything in those buckets sort of has to stay valuable, but deciding which elements of that are going to succeed versus others is a really hard question. And then, I guess in some sense, that is a better articulation of the question that I would love to debate with people, and I think is being underserved at the moment, is what does a vision for a society look like on the other side of these things? I don't even know what policy levers to pull because I don't even know what we should be aiming for. So if we don't know the goal, it's hard to then decide, which levers to pull. And so I think that is a massive, massive open question. If you had the founding fathers here and you asked them about what we're currently doing, which is, it seems likely that probably a small number of companies in a very small number of countries, 2 essentially, are going to have control of the most powerful technology that we've ever built. and governments will probably have some levers over those people, but there may be no AI like broadly available, super intelligent, or like AIs available for us. It like feels to me like we're getting these massive asymmetries of power, enormous concentration of power. I just think it would be very antithetical to the people who are like, no, we need a right to bear arms against our government. This kind of like, there's a bunch of principled things that they thought through carefully that we are just not at all close to. Almost nobody is having that debate, because roughly the number of people that take these graphs seriously is quite small, and they know almost nothing about history and politics. Like, there are people like me that have spent their entire lives just learning maths and computer science and physics and whatever, and then are suddenly going to be faced with, having to make unbelievable decisions about what ethics, what values have to go into these systems. How should they operate? Who should get access to them? We saw it with social media to an extent where I think we made a grave mistake, which was, I think we did need to rein in the power of social media. But the way we did that was we said, you guys are responsible for policing your platforms. And so rather than say, let's drag back the accountability for sort of what counts as hate speech to our democratic institutions and say, you need to open up your platforms so that we can police them, we said, you need to police them. And that just moved the accountability for these very sophisticated questions away from the democratic institutions and into the companies. I think that's a very bad idea, and we need to find ways to not do that this time.
I suppose the counter to that might be that when the founding fathers wrote the Constitution and started thinking about what kind of society America should be, it was based on a very real, recent historic experience, which was, the right to bear arms, because they had just fought for their freedom and they wanted to ensure that no government could ever exercise tyranny. So is it possible to have a kind of abstract vision of what AI will be in society and what it will mean for us without actually living through it and being able to adjust accordingly? If you take a sort of Hayekian view, which is there is no single intelligent mind that really knows how this is going to play out, it's going to be a combination of many small decisions, price signals. We're going to be following, governments will partly respond to where investors are putting their money. They will adjust accordingly. I guess I'm somewhat skeptical that we can know now what we will need to do in 10 years' time, and that the rush to want to regulate too far ahead may actually hinder us when we are in a competition with other countries that do not have that.
I think that's exactly right. Control. Like, I don't think the EU AI Act was a particularly good idea. I guess the thing I'm sort of advocating for, though, is like, it's not, Hayek wouldn't have said that nobody should try and do anything smart anywhere. It's like the distributed efforts of lots and lots of people trying to do the right thing gets us to a better place. And I think it will have this adjustment that you're talking about. But if nobody thinks about it, you don't get like good outcomes either. And so I'm sort of trying, as much as the tiny element I can to sort of open the debate of what's the right thing. And then, everyone in this room will have a different opinion on these graphs. Everyone in this room will have a different opinion on what should be done about them. But then hopefully, we muddle our way through. Whereas if nobody thinks and we just go blindly into all of this stuff with no possible plans, as like having some ready-made policies for when you turn up in government, really, really valuable. And if we've at least thought about, okay, what if AI does turn out to be a tool? What's the right strategy for the UK? What if it does turn out to be a kind of more alien intelligence? What's the right strategy? And then in the heat of the moment, we've at least done some of the pre-thinking. We've got some ideas. We can pick stuff off the shelf. That seems to me like a better version. And I know you weren't advocating for this, than sort of nobody ever thinking about it and just sort of then having to make it all up on the fly.
So I'm afraid we're going to have to wrap up. If you've got questions and comments, I think, Mark, there's a break now, so you can grab hold of Mark. Your documentary, when is it coming out? Is it going to be released to the general public?
September, yeah, sometime.
September. So you're going to show how a war game process works, which I think is one methodology for trying to visualize the future. Can we thank Mark for